Guam, and thanks for starting your day the KUAM way. Starting lineup, my name is Chris Barnett, this is Group Chat. My guest this morning, one of the guests this morning, Melvin Won Pat Borja from the Commission on Decolonization. Morning.
Good morning.
And welcome aboard.
Thank you. So
you had your first meeting last month, and I thought it was a good pick. There was a lot of speculation going around about who the Leon administration was going to pick for this position. I know they made a real strong commitment to this issue during the campaign, so I like it. I think you're one of these guys who's cut his teeth in this movement and a few other movements, so I think you had the relevant experience, and then you bring that kind of youthful, almost a continuation of the trend that under Cabo Tenorio where they had Amanda. Get someone young who's got the energy. I mean, I hope you got the energy.
I definitely do.
I know no one's called you young in a while, so
I know, it's nice.
So let's talk about, I kind of want to bring you in here because I know that a lot of stuff is in limbo because of this lawsuit with Dave Davis. Mm-hmm. But what's our plan moving forward? I know there's certain things with this lawsuit that we can't do, right?
Right. Yeah, the lawsuit right now is still in litigation. We're expecting a decision coming down from the 9th District Court by the end of the month. Until such time that the litigation is complete and the case is out of the courts, the two major things the two major ways that it affects us is, one, we cannot set a date for the plebiscite, and two, there's a current moratorium on the registration of new voters. And so definitely puts us in a precarious situation because the work should not stop.
Right. But can't stop, won't stop.
Yeah, but it's one of those things, just like with our local elections, people start to, for lack of a better word, they care more when the date's coming up,
Right,
so
right.
Setting a date is, probably one of our best tools to engage the community, and until such time, it really puts a strain on our ability to keep the conversation going and to keep the topic relevant. And so, the nice thing about it is that the governor's stance has been very consistent from the outset, is that she really wants to focus on education, and this situation obviously puts some strain on us, but it really should not affect our efforts to educate. And so that's where we're at, and because there are limitations on what we can do, we really want to put as much effort as we can into educating our community and really diversifying the way that we bring this topic into the community.
Right. Well, let's go back to talking about setting that date. I mean, and keeping this issue relevant. I mean, this issue has managed to stay relevant for 20, 40, like 40.
Yeah, quite some time.
Years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes,
maybe
the
longer.
80s. Yeah.
And so you're right. Putting a date on it really makes it concrete to a lot of people, and that's one thing that I know there was a year where Governor Calvo said that he wanted it conducted within that year. Obviously, that didn't happen.
Right.
And like you said, people see a date, they see something concrete. So what's the challenge moving forward with nothing set in stone? I feel like there are things, though, that you guys could be doing in the meantime.
Oh, absolutely. Part of our stance is that we need to ramp up the activity of the commission. Obviously, the commission has not been as active as people would have liked, and a lot of that sentiment gets pushed onto us because we inherit the situation of the past.
Right.
Which is fine. I think that's just the way it works, and the responsibility now is on us. The ball's on our court to really try to change that. And so we've been organizing our efforts to focus on the dissemination of information. Part of what we're doing is to really compile a lot of the information that has been put out. Like you said, this is an old conversation,
right?
And I think that's part of our focus is to really highlight the legacy of this conversation. This is something that has been on the table for a long time. It's something that many before us have pursued, with a lot of effort. A lot of them, have since passed, and so we really want to recognize the efforts of the people who have came before us, and and highlight their work in a way to educate, in an effort to educate the community. And so even though we can't set a date, and even though we can't register voters, it really shouldn't stop us from pursuing education. And my stance is that no effort is ever lost when it comes to education. You know, I mean, there can never be too much education.
Right, right. So what about this money? I know last meeting we got a chunk of money that we have to spend by, what is it, September of this year?
September 30th of this year.
This is the first Gov Guam having a problem spending money.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, usually it's a problem of not having money.
Right. So we have money.
Right, we have some money to spend. Yeah, absolutely. So there was a federal award that was given by the DOI, Department of the Interior, to the tune of $300,000, specifically for public information, right, to help us to educate the community
on decolonization.
Issue, right, on decolonization, particularly the process, but also, you know, to encompass the status options. And so part of the challenges for us is that, you know, we inherited a situation where the money had not been spent since the award, and we're coming up on this deadline, and the deadline really is the extension. And so what we've had to do is to really plan, to make an aggressive plan for how we're going to spend down this money, but use it wisely, right? Not just to spend it to spend it, right, but to spend it in a way that we can leverage those efforts to increase the amount of awareness and education in our community. You know, we've been working very closely with DOI. We've been working very closely with the governor and with the task forces and the board, you know, and I feel like we've come up with a good plan. We actually have a meeting with the Department of the Interior next week or this week. And so, you know, we're very optimistic about the progress that we've made. We're very optimistic about the way that DOI sees our efforts.
It's interesting that we get this federal money to push an education campaign for something that the federal government doesn't necessarily support.
Right. Well, I think that part of it is, and I think that's an important question to pose because, or important comment to make because, you know, a lot of people when they think about decolonization, they ask that question, right? Like, what is the, you know, why are we doing this? I mean, we know what the federal, you know, government stance is. We know, you know, the way that the feds benefit from this current political status.
Right.
But I think that that's, you know, a big part of the conversation because in our pursuit of decolonization, in our pursuit of self-determination, you know, what we're doing is we are engaging in the process through the avenue created for us by the international community and particularly through the UN. And so part of that process includes these treaties, right? UN Resolution 5114 or 1514 and 1541, which lay out the parameters for how this should work. And what's important about this in terms of the federal government is that, you know, the United States, they are part of these resolutions, and therefore by signing on to these resolutions, they are then taking on the responsibility through sacred trust to not just allow us to pursue it, but even more so to support our efforts in doing it. And that's why this federal money exists, is because they're bound by sacred trust to support the efforts of decolonization. And so in this case, that support is coming in terms of funding.
Right.
We're not the only ones who got the funding. You know, the U.S. Virgin Islands got funding. American Samoa got funding. And so, you know, this is one of those things that, you know, we can see, you know, this is the federal government putting their money where their mouth is, right? And so we really have to take advantage. We got to be smart about it. But it doesn't just end there. You know, part of the controversy with decolonization, you know, you hear it a lot in the media is, you know, people are critical about the government spending local funds that's coming from the general fund in order to push this topic. And I think that that's something that will always be controversial, but I also think that's something that is very important. You know, like you said, the federal government they have more to lose than to gain in a change of political status.
And it's kind of like one of the things that happens as a colony, we get put in this position where, you know, our indigenous population dwindles, and then we have to use government money to go down this track, and really the only reason why we have to is because we're inhibited in so many ways to make money with our current political system.
And I think that it's important.
The ironies everywhere.
Absolutely, but you know, in the same breath, I think it's really important that our local government must take responsibility for this push. You know, it is our responsibility to pursue our own decolonization, right? I mean, the nature of decolonization is one of empowerment, right? We should be empowered to make these changes on our own. We should have the ability, we should put forward the effort to make it happen. And without the commitment by our local government to pursue it, I mean, we're dead in the water.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's really important that we get behind it. And obviously, you know, there's always going to be issues of, you know, impropriety when it comes to funding. There's always going to be, you know, criticism about how money is spent or how it isn't spent. But I think that the important thing is that, you know, we have to make the commitment to pursue it. We cannot rely on the federal government to do it for us. Yeah, they're giving us funding, but as we've seen here with the funding, it's not, the funding itself doesn't get the job done, right? There still has to be work put in that makes the boat move, you know, makes the vehicle move. And so, you know, it's, if we don't make that commitment on our side to pursue it, to actively engage in it, I mean, there's nothing doing.
So what happens if we don't spend that money? What's it mean for future monies?
It definitely doesn't bode well for us, you know, in terms of receiving future funding. I think that the biggest issue for us is that we lose out on an opportunity because funding is always going to be scarce. You know, we're always going to have funding issues. And so, you know, being able to be efficient with money is absolutely important. But I think that we have to capitalize on the resources that are available to us. You know, I mean, even now, if you think about this particular award, you know, it was kind of put out in the media that the feds, you know, put millions of dollars into decolonization, and in reality, that was a part of a larger grant. Right, so the money where the fund where our money comes from is part of a larger grant that went into a bunch of different projects that don't necessarily have to do with decolonization. This is the one piece that really addresses it directly. And so, you know, it's always going to be a situation like that. We're never, you know, the Commission on Decolonization will always be underfunded.
Right. You're never going to eat the main entree. It's
right.
always scraps.
But even that's not to say that it's you know, that it cannot change. I mean, I think that when we start to move forward and when we start to see, when our community starts to understand the importance and significance of a campaign such as this, we start to see that it really does pay off to invest in it. I mean, just to kind of put this in perspective, I found out recently that I believe it was under Governor Atta, our predecessor, which was the Commission on Self-Determination, they at one time they had a budget of like $2 million. Right. You know, so I think that it's important to note that they're in the past there has been a lot of effort. $2 million? Oh, I wish. Our budget is not even anywhere close to that.
That's what I think when we talk about local government supporting it. I mean, we both acknowledged at the beginning of this broadcast that this is an issue that's, you know, I mean, decades old, and there was a big push, right? And
right.
I like to think of it almost like war claims. Hopefully not as ironic of an ending, but we had this push. People have been, you know, moving this issue forward, and then we just kind of, you know, we didn't get the Commonwealth, right. So it kind of stopped there. And then we saw a big dearth, I know Gutierrez is a big supporter of it. Maybe it was a little quiet in the, you know, Camacho Moylan administration, but I really felt like Governor Cabo at the tail end, you know, he made it known that this was something that went to UN, and it right. continues under Lou. But I know that this administration really talked about this issue a lot.
Absolutely, and you know, it just, you know, my conversations with the governor, you know, she's very committed to this issue. Right. She absolutely recognizes the importance, the significance of an issue like this and its impact on our ability to govern ourselves and to really improve the situation. You know, there's a lot of limitations of our government that are imposed on us purely because of our political status.
Right, yeah.
And so I think that, you know, that type of understanding and of the issue and the type of impact that it can have on us, I think is critical. You know, and so, you know, having a governor that is educated, that is committed, absolutely pays dividends for us. And, you know, we can see that, right? Like in Governor Atta's time in the 80s, that was the one and only time that this thing that it made it to Congress. Right. You know, we actually had a vote that went to Congress. I mean, granted, the Commonwealth Act got shot down, but I mean, we've never been closer. Right. And so, you know, the investment in that movement at that time obviously paid dividends. And so, you know, we're hoping that with this type of push and this type of support from the administration, you know, we can be that successful again. And, you know, the second time around, we're able to learn from our mistakes. We're able to really be critical of the movement and, you know, what caught it up, what allowed it to be successful, and what we can change to move forward, you know?
I think a lot of us are on the same page. Like we're over here, and then you have people who want Guam to remain a colony, or these naysayers who every time we turn around they bring up that, oh, Guam can't do this because the Organic Act says this, or you guys are just a territory. So I think we just need to keep moving forward and forget these people. If they don't get it, they don't understand it. If they're not going to be able to vote, then screw them. Let's just keep going forward.
Right. Yeah, I think that part of our task is not just to educate the potential voters, but to educate the entire community. I think that decolonization has this way of being very polarizing. It really does pit our residents against each other in a lot of ways. But I think that if we change the way that we look at decolonization and what the end goal means for all of us, whether you're a quote unquote native inhabitant or not, I think that we can all agree that we desire change. Even the naysayers don't like the status quo. Even the people who say, well, why isn't status quo an option? There's still things that they would like to see change about the status quo. And I think that goes, education helps us to understand the issue better, so that even the people who believe that the status quo should be a viable option, and they can see and acknowledge that the status quo still needs changing, we can also see that the decolonization process allows an avenue for that.
Yeah,
right?
And I think what happens is a lot of times people muddy the process with the product, right? So
Absolutely.
The decolonization process, I think people hate on it because in their mind they think, oh, independence, or oh, free association, or oh, we're never going to become a state. So I think we need to, those people definitely need to realize the difference between decolonization and their status options. Well, I'm going to sit down with some of the task force heads. I know you're busy. I just want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And good luck.
Thanks.
Here with a couple of task force chairs, of course, from the Independence Task Force, Dr. Michael Bevacqua. And from the Statehood Task Force, Senator Eddie Duenas. Good morning.
Good morning.
Half a day.
And so we're talking with Melvin about having to spend this money, I think it's by September, right? And
That's what we understand.
Yeah, I told him it's the first time Guam had a problem spending money. So what do you plan to do? What do you think? Because I feel like statehood, if you look at the statistics, most people seem to favor status quo or statehood. A status quo is not an option.
Basically, remaining within the American family to
Right.
start with. And right now we're so used with the status quo, because we've been with this for the past 100 years,
Right.
to be. And so people kind of like the idea, and they also like having their citizenship, and also having a U.S. passport. And but the thing about this night that we have the tendency to overlook now is the fact that our citizenship is by legislation.
Mm.
By act of Congress under the Organic Act of Guam.
Right.
We have conferred. It is not by virtue of the U.S. Constitution, or if you were naturalized, a different thing. Then that's permanent.
So you're trying to imply that what Congress gives, Congress can take away.
It is actually, it's something that I do a scare issue. Said, all we have to do is Congress. So one of these days, one congressman will have a headache, and introduce one line. It is hereby repeal the Organic Act of Guam, and we're going.
Right. But that to me, that really highlights why we need this process of decolonization in the first place, is because we're held prisoner, pretty much.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And then when we proceed into more full integration into the U.S., then we get to see more rights and privileges. And, like, for example, we keep complaining, how come we're not voting for the president or the vice president? You know why? Is it because by nature of our citizenship? No, it isn't. Because I don't know about you, but I can go to Hawaii and vote for the president there, register there, see. And vice versa. President of Hawaii come over here and register for, to vote in Guam. He knows his right to vote for the president. So I look call it into the freak of geography.
The freak of geography.
Yeah, because we're in Guam, if you were in Hawaii, it's different. See.
So you're a freak.
Huh? Yeah, no, then we can vote. See.
Right.
So it seems to me that our citizenship is not really the real question whether we are full citizenship or not. I think we can exercise it depending where we are.
Right.
If we go to the mainland, to the States, or even Hawaii, we can exercise fully, and nobody will question it, because despite the fact that we're made American citizens by virtue of the Organic Act of Guam.
What I think is really interesting is how you two are on opposite ends of this status option spectrum, yet you guys find middle ground in both, knowing that decolonization is the way to get us to where we're going to go.
To me, no, Chris, the way I understand it, decolonization is actually emanated from the United Nations. And what it merely tries to do is that, you see, right now Guam is categorized under the non-self-governing territory. It was placed there by the U.S. when the United Nations was came into being in 1950, I believe, or something like that.
Right.
So the U.S. put us there, so we were classified as non-governing self-territory. So the UN said, okay, most of those people, I think there were almost 150 territories like us with different administrative power that were placed in there, and they start beginning,
the process of decolonization.
So that's what it means, for example, to get yourself from a non-self-governing territory to a governing territory, So that's basically what it means. It's not choosing whether statehood or free association or
I was talking to Melvin. I think people mix up the process of decolonization with the different status options, and I think people think for some weird reason when they hear decolonization they think radical independence activists, right?
and that's why independence has the most work to do,
right?
Because people interpret independence as meaning isolated, cut off from the world, right? And when you look at it,
who interprets it like? I feel like maybe the older people do, but younger.
No, lots of people. I mean, let me think here. I was just fighting with somebody about it this morning. Random person at a coffee shop, and so, and part of it is sort of that idea that independence means breaking away. You do everything on your own, and forgetting that all independence is a higher level of sovereignty. It's a level of sovereignty where you get to choose who you want to work with, who you want to partner with, and ideally you have more control over what happens in your island, who comes into your island, what leaves your island, what kind of military training is happening in your island, all sorts of stuff like that.
Right. And so I think on you guys' end, probably the biggest part, I mean, I don't know if that's your plan, but when I think of an education campaign for independence, I think part of that has to be dispelling these myths that people have about independence.
Oh, all the time. I mean, and it's once you get past a lot of those myths and sort of misconceptions, what you find is that people aren't necessarily afraid of independence. Right. It was funny because I was talking to somebody today who wasn't in favor of independence. And he said, but I went out and I started my business and I did it on my own. And he was talking personally about how he had invested in himself and achieved economic independence. And I said, well, you liked independence.
You like that, huh? You like that, huh?
Independence served you in your own life. So then why not? Give us here a chance as well.
Yeah,
let us think about investing in ourselves.
And I think that
Rich, if I may say regarding that thing about that, that statehood, it's a virtual independence, because when Guam becomes a state, it acquires what they call state sovereignty.
Right.
And as a state sovereignty, you can do practically anything you want to do, provided it's purely state matters. And secondly, that provided that fall within the concept of the U.S. Constitution and federal law. So as long as you remain in that parameter, we are free to do practically everything we want to do in Guam. We can reorganize the government. We can, the governor, for example, we can say one term of 10 years or one term.
You can legalize marijuana,
huh?
right? If you wanted to legalize marijuana, there are several states that have already.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
What do you guys think about people who say that independence and statehood are both equally unrealistic for Guam?
Well, I would say some skeptics would think that way, but I don't think so.
You're not a skeptic.
I'm not a skeptic. I'm an optimist. Take a look at the history of Hawaii and Alaska. At the very beginning, people were telling Hawaii that you'll never become a state because you're not part of the continental U.S.
Right.
Same thing with Alaska. Look what happened. Congress voted, and the thing that we should focus on the fact that if Congress votes to make you a state, that's it.
Right. Yeah.
I would argue that statehood is probably less likely to happen than independence.
I see.
Just because of the politics of it, right? Because
the congressional votes that we would get. And
because you would need to have a lot of. I mean, I think it could be very possible that the U.S. could incorporate Guam, like as a county of Hawaii or something like that, or give it another territorial status, like the CNMI or Washington D.C.
Yeah.
But becoming a full state is very, very unlikely. I think there would be a greater chance of achieving independence than becoming a full state, just because, that we see that Guam is, we may say we've got lots of friends in the United States. They like Chamorro chip cookies in the United States, for example. But then once you actually sit down and say we're ready for our 2 senators, suddenly you find that a lot of those people are kind of like, do we want to give these people on the other side of the world that much power?
Right.
And so that's part of the politics there.
But I mean, that being said, obviously the reason why the U.S. has stuck around here for so long is because of our geography. I mean, we're in an important place where China is just really building all around us. So, I'm a realist. I think it is far-fetched that the U.S. would choose to make Guam a state, but I think that the precedent is there for them to maintain some kind of presence here, even if we're independent. And I think that's another knock that independence gets, is people think that if we achieve independence, the U.S. is going to pack up and leave the very next day.
I mean, it's one of the weirdest things in history, but that colonizers and former colonizers kind of sometimes work well together. You look
almost like you're cool with your ex.
The U.S. Yeah, exactly, right. You know each other's shit. Yeah. You know sort of all your problems, all your flaws, and then you come to a new level of acceptance and understanding about each other.
You do you, I'll do me.
One thing too, Chris, that I would like to bring out at this time, that we talk about the military bases here. That military base is the land that was purchased. It was purchased.
Purchased.
Yeah. And it went to what do you call that thing, the condemnation, eminent domain and things like that. But and then the owners of that have a say in court. They at the beginning they complain about the amount of compensation, which I understand is very, very low.
Right.
And so the court came back second time around and told Congress to reappropriate more to get the level up to where it's an acceptable level of. But Anderson Air Force Base was purchased by the Air Force military, Naval Station again, and so NAS. That's why as a result of that, NAS, when the time comes when the military, the Navy didn't have any use for anyone, they say give it back to Guam, and we got it back without paying a cent because they owned it.
Yeah.
So that's the thing there. Then when we talk about the military.
But I mean, in terms of the military, like one of the benefits of being independent is that you could actually have a relationship with the United States. So right now, we're in this weird place as a territory, right, where we feel like we've got a relationship to the U.S., right? So an admiral comes and donates old computers, right, or to an elementary school, maybe sits down and has a photo up with the governor. But they just do that, not because they have to, but just as sort of public relations, community relations, right? But as an independent country, they would have to have a formal relationship. There'd have to be some agreement, and so sometimes
some accountability.
Exactly. Sometimes, and somebody was talking to me the other day about sort of military contracts. The way Guam is now, Guam doesn't have any say over where the money gets spent. As an independent country, if there's a foreign military presence, you negotiate the percentage of the contracts. You can say this much has to go for these, or we want these contracts to go to local vendors. You can't do that as a territory.
What about as a state?
The only thing, Chris, about that, and I like to point this out every so often, we go to the meeting. When you negotiate a two-party system, two parties have to be agreeable to it. See? You and I, for example, say, hey, Ed, I want $1,000 for the property over there. And I said, no dice, Chris, no dice. There won't be any negotiation.
Right.
If you don't get my say for that, see. So that's yes, you do negotiate, but it all depends on how you negotiate and whether the object of the negotiation is both beneficial to both parties. If it's only beneficial to one, chances are that the party will not go for it.
I think you just described modern day life.
Yeah.
When the military negotiates, and then we just got to go for it.
So that's what I mean on that. But again, going back to about, you know, from the very beginning, we've been harping about we don't have a say-so, which I agree to a certain extent.
I see.
But like I mentioned earlier about the state sovereignty, if one becomes a state, we will acquire state sovereignty. That means you give us all the leeway to do what we can do on, provided it's purely state matters. We can reorganize the government if we want to.
You know, I agree with you to a certain point about negotiating and just really having elected leaders who are balls out, who know that who own their powers. You know what I mean? Like I'm Uncle Carl. You remember Uncle Carl marching down to Runau, you know, taking a stand against the federal government. I mean, even to some extent, former Governor Calvo, he said, you know, we're not going to get the H2s that we need, then I'm oppose the buildup. So I think there's a lot of things that our elected leaders can do to take a firmer stance, and I think that the legislature really does, you know, I mean, they try to do a good job in terms of attending a lot of the military buildup stuff.
That's why, more than anything, what we need from our leaders is that sense of consistency, right?